Chapter 1. A Rusty Relic Among Stars. The spaceport of Veldris. 9 was a living, chaotic machine, a symphony of metal and voices, of thrusters roaring and docking clamps screeching against aging platforms. Ships of every size and shape crowded the orbital station, from sleek corporate freighters bearing the insignias of the galaxy's wealthiest trading guilds to the battle-scarred hulls of independent mercenaries looking for their next payday. The air was thick with the scent of burned coolant, ionized plasma, and the distinct metallic tang of recycled oxygen, all of it mingling with the sweat and grime of the thousands of beings who passed through this floating crossroads of interstellar civilization. Veldris. 9 wasn't a place for tourists or diplomats. It was a station for the desperate, the ambitious, the reckless, a place where a person could just as easily strike a fortune as they could disappear without a trace. The lower docking bays were particularly rough, the underbelly of the station where salvagers, bounty hunters, and smugglers gathered, where maintenance crews worked tirelessly to patch together vessels barely holding themselves together, and where illegal deals were made in the dimly lit corridors away from security patrols. It was here, at the farthest end of Dock 47, that a particular ship sat in silence, its presence an anomaly among the more streamlined and modern crafts. The Star Hunter was a sight to behold, but not in the way that inspired awe. It looked like a relic from another time, an ancient Earth-class long-range freighter that had seen far better days, its rusted hull patched together with visibly mismatched plating, giving it the appearance of something held together more by sheer will than by proper engineering. Its thrusters were asymmetrically reinforced, and its wing flaps bore scorch marks from past encounters, remnants of skirmishes long forgotten. The landing gear groaned audibly, and occasional wisps of vented steam hissed from its underbelly like sighs from a dying beast. The ship didn't just look old, it looked defiant, as if it had endured beyond its intended expiration date, simply despite those who had long since dismissed it. And standing before it, arms crossed, expression unreadable, was Commander Zara Talvanix of the Velthari Dominion, her golden eyes glinting with barely concealed amusement. She was tall and imposing, her emerald green skin marking her as Velthari nobility, her black and gold exosuit polished to perfection, the insignia of the Dominion's elite starfighter corps gleaming on her chest. Everything about her screamed precision, efficiency, superiority, the kind of presence that commanded respect and expected immediate compliance. She was a warrior and a pilot, a woman who had flown the best ships in the Dominion's fleet, and she had seen engineering at its peak, the most advanced warships in the known galaxy, vessels so perfectly designed that they responded as if they were an extension of their pilot's own body. And yet, here she stood, staring at a human ship so battered and outdated that it belonged in a scrapyard rather than a docking bay. And standing next to that rusting heap of metal, with far too much confidence for someone who clearly flew the equivalent of flying debris, was Ethan Voss, a man who had clearly spent more time in the cockpit of a second-hand ship than in any high-tech training facility. He was lean but solid, wearing a worn-out brown flight jacket, a pair of reinforced cargo pants, and boots that had seen enough miles to have their own stories. His dark hair was slightly unkempt, and there was a permanent smirk tugging at the corners of his lips, as if he was always waiting for someone to say something stupid, just so he could mock them for it. He stood casually, with an air of relaxed defiance, like he had seen this kind of judgment before and didn't give a damn about it. Zara scoffed, shaking her head slightly before speaking. "This," she said, arching a perfect brow as she gestured toward the Star Hunter. "This is your ship?" Ethan's smirk widened slightly. "Yep." Zara took another slow look at the vessel, as if trying to determine whether or not this was a joke. "This thing should be in a scrapyard. It looks like it could fall apart just sitting here." Ethan chuckled, folding his arms across his chest. "You think so?" Zara exhaled, shaking her head. "I don't think I know. You seriously fly this? I've seen wreckage pulled from battlefield debris that looked more space-worthy." Ethan tilted his head slightly. "You sure about that?" Zara scoffed again. "I'm Velthari. I was flying ships before I could walk. My personal fighter could fly circles around this junk heap in its sleep." Ethan nodded slowly, as if considering something. Then, he took a step forward, just enough to close the distance between them slightly, his smirk never wavering. "Tell you what, Commander. Since you're so confident, why don't we put that theory to the test?" Zara's eyes narrowed slightly. And what exactly do you have in mind? Ethan gestured toward the Star Hunter's cockpit. Step inside. Take a seat. See if your ears are still working when we fire up the engines. For a moment, Zara just stared at him, her gaze searching his face for any hint of deception, for any indication that this was some kind of elaborate joke. But Ethan's smirk remained steady, his stance unwavering. He wasn't bluffing. That only intrigued her more. Zara lifted her chin slightly, a small, almost imperceptible smirk playing at the corner of her lips. All right, human. Let's see what this scrap heap of yours can do. Ethan's grin widened. Hope you brought earplugs. Zara followed him up the boarding ramp, stepping inside the Star Hunter's interior. She had expected disaster, but what she found was something else entirely. The corridors were narrow but functional, lined with reinforced bulkheads that had clearly been reinforced beyond standard specs. The ship felt old, but it didn't feel neglected. Everything was in working order, every panel secured and optimized, every piece of tech a careful fusion of old Earth designs and scavenged Velthury modifications. The more she looked, the more she realized this ship wasn't falling apart. It was built to last. They reached the cockpit, and Zara took a seat in the co-pilot's chair, watching as Ethan settled into his seat, fingers moving across the overhead controls with muscle memory born from years of experience. The moment his hands touched the ship, it was as if he and the Star Hunter were the same entity, something connected, something understood. Then, he flipped the ignition switch, and the engines roared to life. Zara had expected a hum, maybe a low rumble of thrusters coming online. What she got was a shockwave of mechanical fury, so deafening that it sent vibrations through the hull, rattling the entire docking bay and nearly shaking the bolts from the walls. The power surge sent a tremor through the floor, and the entire station shuddered under the force of the ignition, alarms flickering as if warning that something far too powerful for its age had just been awakened. Zara gripped the armrests, her golden eyes widening in shock. Ethan just smirked. Still think she's just a rusted heap? Zara swallowed, but said nothing, because for the first time, she wasn't sure anymore. Chapter 2. The Roar of a Dying Star. The cockpit of the Star Hunter vibrated as the ship's engines finished cycling up, the deep, guttural roar of its thrusters reverberating through the entire docking bay, shaking the surrounding station like a predator waking from its slumber. The sound wasn't just loud, it was power incarnate, a noise that carried weight, a deep, primal rumble that announced, without words, that this ship had defied time, death, and entropy itself. It was the kind of noise that older pilots respected and younger ones feared, a sound that didn't belong to the sleek, soulless ships of today, but to an era when engines were built with raw, unchecked fury rather than quiet efficiency. Zara Talvanix felt it in her bones, in the very core of her being. The sound wasn't just noise, it was power, and it rattled her more than she was willing to admit. She gritted her teeth, forcing her posture to remain composed, her golden eyes flickering between the ship's archaic control panels and the human who sat beside her, far too amused by her reaction. Ethan Voss leaned back in the pilot's chair, hands casually resting on the controls, a lazy smirk tugging at his lips as he studied her. Still think she's just a rusted heap? He asked, his voice smooth, confident, barely audible over the deep thrum of the Star Hunter's reactors settling into idle mode. Zara scoffed, masking her unease behind practiced arrogance. Noise doesn't make a ship powerful, human. Any dying star can roar before it collapses. Ethan chuckled, shaking his head. Oh, you haven't seen anything yet. Before she could demand what exactly that meant, he flipped a switch on the console, and suddenly, the ship lurched forward, lifting off the docking platform with a force that sent a sharp jolt through Zara's spine. She instinctively gripped the armrests, feeling the acceleration press against her, faster than she had expected for a ship of this size and age. The Star Hunter wasn't just moving, it was tearing free from the station with a kind of defiant, raw aggression, like a beast breaking loose from its chains. The docking bay alarms blared in protest, warning of an unscheduled departure, but Ethan paid them no mind. He angled the ship sharply, sending them into an upward spiral as they shot through the docking shield and into the open void of space beyond. The moment they cleared the station's gravity field, he pushed the throttle hard, and the ship responded like a starfighter, surging forward with a sudden burst of acceleration that pinned Zara against her seat. Her breath caught in her throat. This wasn't possible. A ship of this size, this weight, this age, it shouldn't be able to move like this. She had spent years piloting some of the most advanced warships in the Dominion's fleet. She had flown vessels engineered for precision, ships designed to execute flawless maneuvers with zero inertia drift. She had felt the elegant grace of Velthary assault-class interceptors, had piloted ships so advanced they responded to mere thoughts through neural link controls. But this ship didn't glide, it tore through space like a beast hunting its prey. It was brutal, raw, violent in its movements. And against all logic, it was fast. Zara forced herself to speak, voice steady despite the unnatural force pressing against her. This ship shouldn't be able to move like this. Ethan laughed, but it wasn't mockery, it was genuine amusement, the kind that came from someone who had been underestimated one too many times and thrived on proving people wrong. That's because you're thinking like a Velthary. All grace and elegance, all about efficiency and perfection. The Star Hunter isn't about that. She's not built to be polite. She's built to be a problem. Zara narrowed her eyes. A problem? Ethan's smirk deepened as he flipped another switch. Watch. He slammed the thrusters forward again, and the Star Hunter shot ahead with such force that the space behind them warped from the heat distortion, leaving a trail of ionized energy that rippled through the void like a comet's tail. The ship's engines pulsed, the modified thrusters flaring a deep, unstable blue, energy coiling like barely contained lightning. Zara's body tensed as she felt the gravitational pull shift, her internal equilibrium sensors struggling to adjust. And then, just as she thought she had recalibrated, Ethan did something insane. He cut the main engines entirely. For a split second, they were in free fall, drifting through the abyss of space at speeds that should have sent them spiraling uncontrollably. And then, he fired the reverse thrusters. The ship didn't just stop, it pivoted violently in place, flipping end over end in a maneuver that should have ripped it apart, and then it ignited forward again, now facing the exact opposite direction. Zara barely had time to process it. One moment, they were moving toward deep space. The next, they were facing Veldris, 9 again, now approaching the station at high velocity. And it was only then that Zara realized what he was doing. Her head snapped toward the sensors, and there it was, a patrol frigate, heading straight toward them. The Dominion had seen their unauthorized departure, and now they were locking weapons. "You lunatic!" Zara snapped, her fingers flying over the console as she tried to override the ship's auto trajectory. "You planned this?" Ethan grinned. "Not exactly, but I knew they'd come looking." Zara cursed under her breath, her mind racing. The Dominion patrol frigate wasn't built for dogfighting, it was a stationary blockade ship, meant to disable and capture, not chase. But that didn't mean it wasn't dangerous. "They're charging a disruptor pulse," Zara barked. "They'll fry our systems before we can hit warp." Ethan didn't even blink. "Not if we get close enough." Zara's breath caught. "You're insane." Ethan laughed. "Maybe. Hold on tight." He slammed the throttle forward, and the Star Hunter surged toward the Dominion frigate, closing the distance at speeds that should have been impossible for a ship of its class. The patrol vessel reacted, its weapons powering up, targeting systems locking on, preparing to fire. And then, just before the disruptor pulse could launch, Ethan did the unthinkable. He cut the engines mid-flight again, sending them into another freefall spin, and then, he fired the stabilizers at full burn. The Star Hunter didn't just evade the blast, it rode the shockwave, absorbing just enough of the energy to slingshot them into an entirely new trajectory, sending them spinning away from the station at escape velocity. The Dominion frigate overshot their position, its weapons still locked where they had been a second ago. And by the time they corrected their mistake, the Star Hunter was already gone, disappearing into the warp lanes like a ghost slipping through the cracks of the universe. For a long moment, the cockpit was silent. Zara finally let out a slow breath, her pulse pounding. Ethan turned to her, his smirk infuriatingly smug. "Still think she's just a rusted heap?" Zara exhaled, pressing a hand against her temple. "I hate you." Ethan laughed. "Nah, you love it." And for the first time, she wasn't sure if he was wrong. Chapter 3. The Secrets of a Rusted Ghost. The Star Hunter had slipped into the warp lanes like a ghost, leaving behind the Dominion patrol frigate that had been too slow, too predictable, too reliant on superior firepower to ever imagine that an old, rusted human ship could outmaneuver it. The silence in the cockpit was thick, stretched taut between the two figures seated side by side, their bodies still adjusting from the violent maneuvers they had just endured. The glow of the console flickered against the walls, casting long shadows that seemed to breathe with the pulse of the ship itself. A vessel that had been mocked, underestimated, and dismissed yet had just proven itself a living legend. Zara Talvanix exhaled slowly, her fingers still gripping the armrests of the co-pilot's seat. Her mind was a storm of conflicting emotions, struggling to reconcile what had just happened. Everything she knew about spacecraft engineering, about physics, about military doctrine and strategic combat, all of it had just been shattered by this ship, by this human pilot, by Ethan Voss, the reckless, insufferable, impossibly skilled man sitting next to her with that same damn smirk on his face, as if he wasn't even remotely fazed by what they had just done. She turned toward him, golden eyes narrowing. "You're going to explain," she said, her voice sharp, her tone leaving no room for negotiation. Ethan didn't even look at her. "Explain what? That we just made the Dominion look like a bunch of amateurs?" Zara gritted her teeth. "That dash," she gestured toward the empty space beyond the cockpit window, where the warp lanes stretched into infinite ribbons of light. The Dominion frigate, now light years behind them, dash should not have been possible. This ship should not be able to move like that. It defies every engineering principle I've ever studied. I don't care if you're some stubborn human with a love for old junk, but that wasn't skill alone. That was something else." Ethan finally turned to look at her, leaning back in his seat, hands laced behind his head like he didn't have a care in the world. "What's the matter, Commander? Can't accept that a rusted heap just outflew one of your shiny, perfect Dominion vessels?" Zara's patience was wearing thin. She had been humiliated enough today. "You know what I mean. I want answers." Ethan sighed, as if debating whether or not to humor her. Then, after a long pause, he reached forward, pressing a few buttons on the console. The lights in the cockpit dimmed, and the familiar hum of the engines deepened into something lower, almost like a heartbeat. A hidden system activated, and suddenly the control panels before her shifted, revealing subsystems she hadn't noticed before, encrypted data streams running beneath the surface of what had first appeared to be an archaic human control interface. Zara's breath hitched slightly. She hadn't realized it before, but the Star Hunter wasn't just an old ship that had been modified, it was something else entirely. Ethan turned to her, his expression finally serious. "You want to know why this ship moves like it does? Why it doesn't fly like anything else in the galaxy? Fine, but if I tell you, you don't get to walk away pretending you didn't hear it." Zara stared at him. The weight of his words settled in her gut like a warning. This wasn't just about a skilled pilot with a heavily modified ship. This was bigger than that. She exhaled sharply. "Talk." Ethan leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees, and when he spoke, there was something different in his voice, now something heavier, something almost haunted. The Star Hunter isn't just an old Earth-class freighter. It was built during the Galactic Insurrection Wars, back when humanity was still clawing its way into interstellar relevance. The original design was meant for deep space reconnaissance, long-haul scouting missions that most ships wouldn't survive. But this particular model, it was part of an experimental program. Zara's brow furrowed. "What kind of program?" Ethan's eyes flickered with something unreadable. *** classified. But since I don't work for them anymore, I don't care who knows. The Star Hunter is equipped with a precursor drive." Zara's heart stopped. She blinked once. Then again. "You're lying." Ethan smirked, but there was no humor in it. "Am I?" Zara shook her head, trying to process what she had just heard. The precursors, the ancient, vanished species who had left behind remnants of technology, so advanced that no modern civilization had fully unraveled their secrets. The Dominion, the Terran Confederacy, the Zorvathian Empire, all of them had spent centuries searching for precursor artifacts, studying their designs, attempting to reverse engineer their impossible physics. But a precursor drive? That was the holy grail of lost technology. No known civilization had successfully built or replicated one. No ship in history had been able to integrate it into a functioning spacecraft without catastrophic failure. Yet here she was, sitting inside a ship that had just outrun a Dominion war vessel, breaking every law of physics she understood. And now, she knew why. She exhaled sharply, shaking her head again. That should be impossible. Even if humanity had access to a precursor drive, there's no way you dash. Ethan cut her off. They didn't have access to it. They found it, and they tried to keep it hidden. This ship was supposed to be scrapped decades ago, but the problem is, once you install something like that into a vessel, it doesn't just let itself die. Zara felt a cold shiver run down her spine. Ethan's voice lowered, almost like he was afraid to say it too loud. This ship, it remembers. It learns. It adapts. That's why it doesn't fly like anything else in the galaxy. Because it doesn't move like a machine. It moves like something alive. Zara's fingers clenched against her knees. And you? You just stole it? Ethan shrugged. Stole is a strong word. More like liberated. She let out a sharp breath. You have any idea what kind of trouble this puts you in? The Dominion, the Confederacy, hell, every major faction in the galaxy, if they find out what you're sitting on, they'll hunt you until there's nothing left but wreckage. Ethan's smirk returned, but it was tired now, almost resigned. Yeah, I figured that out a long time ago. Silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken implications. Zara finally stood, running a hand through her hair. I should turn you in. Ethan didn't flinch. But you won't. She exhaled slowly, then turned to face him fully. No, I won't. But if you think I'm just going to ignore this, you're an idiot. Ethan grinned. I never expected you to ignore it. I just wanted to see if you were smart enough to realize what you've stumbled into. She rolled her eyes but couldn't hide the faintest hint of a smile. You're still an ass, Voss. He chuckled. And you're still stuck on my ship? Zara sighed. This was going to be a very long ride. Chapter 4. The hunt begins. The Star Hunter drifted through the warp lanes, wrapped in the unnatural stillness of faster-than-light travel, the hum of its engines pulsing like a heartbeat within the walls. Zara Talvanix had fought in wars, piloted the most advanced ships in the Dominion fleet, and had faced death countless times on the battlefield, but she had never felt anything like this strange, almost sentient stillness, as though the ship itself was listening, waiting, learning. She sat in the co-pilot's seat, her golden eyes fixed on the controls, on the displays that should have made sense to her, but didn't. This wasn't just an old human ship with good modifications. It was something else. She turned her gaze to Ethan Voss, the human scavenger, smuggler, and now fugitive, who sat in the pilot's chair, his hands moving over the controls with the ease of a man who had spent years learning the moods of his vessel. He was relaxed, too relaxed, given what they had just survived. They had escaped the Dominion patrol frigate, outmaneuvered it in ways that should have been impossible, and now, they were on the run from an empire that did not tolerate loose ends. Zara exhaled slowly, breaking the silence. They'll come after you. Ethan chuckled, not looking up from the console. They've been coming after me for years. What's one more chase? Zara leaned forward, eyes narrowing. You don't get it, do you? You exposed yourself back there. The moment we pulled that stunt, they knew that this ship isn't just some scrap heap. They'll dig into the records, they'll find out why it moves like it does, and when they do, you won't just have bounty hunters on your tail. The entire Dominion fleet will come looking. Ethan finally turned to face her, the amusement fading from his expression. And what do you suggest? Hand myself in? Surrender? Let them strip the Star Hunter apart piece by piece and lock me up in some deep space prison where no one will ever hear from me again? Zara held his gaze, her jaw tightening. I'm saying you need a plan. Running isn't going to be enough. Not anymore. Ethan sighed, rubbing a hand down his face before pushing himself up from his seat. Come on, I want to show you something. Zara hesitated, then followed as he led her down the narrow corridor of the ship, past the engine room, past the old cargo hold where spare parts and weapon crates were stacked in chaotic but deliberate organization, until they reached a heavily reinforced door at the rear of the vessel. Ethan placed his hand on a biometric panel, and with a hiss of decompression, the door unlocked, revealing a hidden chamber beyond. Zara stepped inside and immediately stopped breathing. The room was small, but its contents sent a chill down her spine. Floating in the center of the chamber, encased in a field of suspended stasis energy, was a precursor core, the heart of the Star Hunter, the source of its unnatural speed, agility, and sentience. The glowing sphere pulsed with deep blue energy, its surface shifting, almost fluid, almost alive, as though it was thinking. Zara had seen precursor relics before, fragments of lost civilizations, remnants of impossible technologies found buried beneath the ruins of forgotten worlds, but this was intact, functional, active, and it was inside a human scavenger ship. She turned to Ethan, her expression unreadable. "How the hell do you even have this?" Ethan leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. "I told you I liberated it. A long time ago." Zara stepped closer, the energy field sending strange, static charges through the air, making the hairs on her arms stand on end. "This should be in a secured Dominion vault, or a Confederacy black site. The fact that it's here, that it's powering this ship dash." She shook her head, exhaling slowly. "You've been sitting on one of the most valuable and dangerous pieces of technology in the known galaxy, and you expect me to believe you're just some rogue pilot who stumbled onto it?" Ethan didn't answer right away. Then, with a sigh, he said, "I didn't just find it. I stole it from the Dominion." Zara's pulse spiked. Her entire body went rigid. The implications of his words hit like a gravitational collapse. The Dominion had spent centuries searching for functional precursor technology. If Ethan had stolen it from them, that meant they had found it first. It meant he had infiltrated a high-security Dominion research facility, taken the one thing they were trying to keep hidden, and escaped. It meant that the reason the Dominion wanted him dead wasn't just because of his ship, it was because he had humiliated them on a scale that no empire could tolerate. Zara's mind reeled. "That's why they want you so badly. It's not just the ship, it's revenge." Ethan nodded slowly. "Yeah, and they're never going to stop coming." Zara paced, fighting to make sense of everything. This changed things. It changed everything. She wasn't just stuck on a ship with an unpredictable human. She was stuck on a ship that was a ticking time bomb, a fugitive vessel that had become the center of a secret war between the most powerful factions in the galaxy. She stopped, inhaled deeply, then turned to him. "So what now? We just keep running? That's your grand strategy?" Ethan gave a humorless chuckle. "That was the plan, but something tells me you have a better idea." Zara studied him for a long moment. Then, she exhaled sharply. "We need to go on the offensive. Find the Dominion's weak points, disrupt their search before they get too close. If we sit back and wait, they'll tighten the noose. If we strike first, we might have a chance." Ethan tilted his head. "And here I thought you were all about order and discipline." Zara gave him a sharp look. "I'm about survival." Ethan grinned. "Then I guess we have a war to start." The hum of the precursor core deepened, as though responding to their resolve. The hunt had begun, and the Star Hunter was ready.